Protecting what has made us rich and free, markets, politics, and the future of the capitalist system. We're going to cover a brief introduction and then touch on some key points from Chapter 7, including examples and some reflection questions for the audience, wrapping up with a conclusion. Today, it's common for people to reflect on anti-government regulation sentiment, though that has not always been the case. How would you feel if I told you there had been a 50-year-long campaign that aimed to reduce government regulations and boost pro-free market sentiment? Charles and David Koch have championed this campaign through building a network of wealthy and influential individuals and organizations, including academia and political institutions, while exposing them to free market ideas and the political strategies to implement them. The belief that government regulation is actively destructive has been, at least in part, constructed by this campaign. But in reality, it is the coupling of free markets with government regulation that makes for a prosperous environment. A study done in the year 2000 showed how free markets need many other institutions in order for both economic growth and social well-being to flourish. There are two categories for economic and political institutions: inclusive, those that which support the functioning of a free market and enable the public to participate in politics, and extractive, which concentrates power into the hands of the elites, both politically and economically. Inclusive regimes include two core institutions: participatory government and the free market. These two act as complements, not adversaries, and are both necessary for the survival and prosperity. Economically, this can be property rights, consumer protections, open markets with low entry costs, effective education, and so on. Politically, this can be voting rights, free media, freedom of speech, and other rights, and checks and balances in government, and so on and so forth. The post-revolutionary United States is an excellent example of this, with its implementation of checks and balances within government, and with things like laws regarding labor regulations and who can work and who can't. As we look at building governments and regulations globally, there are a few necessary points to keep in mind that include the public good, not just GDP, such as minority rights and inclusion as full members of society, priced or regulated major environmental externalities, and business doing everything it can to preserve and strengthen democracy and civil society.
Advocating for minority rights. Building a just and sustainable society requires not only the protection of property and political rights, but also civil rights and equality before the law. Today, LGBTQ+ rights stand at the forefront of this movement. Back in 1992, the Lotus Development Corporation became the first publicly traded company to offer benefits to its gay employees. However, pro-LGBTQ+ corporate policies weren't formally measured until 2002, when the first corporate Equality Index was introduced. At the time, only 13 of 319 surveyed companies achieved a perfect score. Today, even though the index is far more rigorous, 366 of 781 businesses now score a full 100, reflecting a dramatic shift towards inclusivity. Additionally, 85% of Fortune 500 companies now include gender identity protections in their non-discrimination policies, up from just 3% in 2002. Yet the battle is far from over. About half of the 8.1 million LGBTQ+ workers aged 16 and older still live in the states without legal protections. This gap is especially visible in more conservative regions such as Indiana, where in 2015, the then Governor Mike Pence signed the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, legislation criticized for enabling discrimination against LGBTQ+ individuals. Before it was passed, several Indiana-based tech CEOs from companies like Salesforce, Clear Software, Cloud1, and SalesView urged Pence to veto the bill, warning that discrimination hurts businesses, limiting their ability to recruit and retain top talent. In reality, discrimination is the bread and butter issue for the world's largest corporations. Modern employees, especially millennials and Gen Z, expect their employers to stand for diversity, equality, and respect.
Henderson argues that tackling the climate crisis can't be left to governments alone. The private sector, meaning corporations, investors, and business leaders, have both the resources and the responsibility to lead. Today, organizations like the World Economic Forum and the International Chamber of Commerce are bringing companies together to coordinate sustainability efforts across countries. Even historically conservative groups like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the Business Roundtable have begun acknowledging the need for climate action. They've called for innovation-based solutions and for companies to play a central role in reducing emissions. Henderson's point is clear. Businesses are no longer just market actors, they are political players. The same way Danish companies took initiative during their national crisis, modern corporations must act to protect the planet. It's not only the moral thing to do, it's also good business, because climate risk is now one of the biggest economic risks of all.
As touched on earlier, free markets are essential to a democratic system. In a free market, the items are being sold and they are determined by privately owned businesses and the consumers meeting supply and demand rather than purely government regulation. For political institutions to be genuinely free and fair, everyone's voice must be heard. Voting is a key part to democracy. External spending is an issue because it leads to some voices being overlooked. Companies that want to contribute to a higher percentage of voters are increasing voter participation through programs such as paid time off to vote, an election day without meetings, and support for early voting. This also means collaborating with those who are trying to reduce the amount of money in politics. External spending on presidential elections surged from $338 million in 2008 to $1.4 billion in 2016. There is now a great deal more corporate money in politics. Money influences decisions, and in a way, the buying of politicians not only reduces trust in the democratic process, but also makes the system itself less democratic. Germany post-World War I was in an economic crisis under an undemocratic regime. Under the lead of Hugo Steins, the richest man in Germany at the time, Steins-Legion Agreement was made. This agreement established an 8-hour workday, the recognition of labor unions, and a right to establish work councils. Steins also laid the foundation for a national system of employer representation. However, World War II led to the breakdown of this agreement. Businesses were then reaping short-term profits rather than creating value, which is ultimately destroying both the country and their own wealth. After some time, out of fear of radical unrest, the Federation of German Industries, the Federation of German Employers Association, and the Confederation of German Trade Unions were formed. The three organizations worked together to revive the tradition of good employee-manager relations and collective bargaining. So, what we can learn from Germany. Germany now is one of the world's strongest and most equal economies. In 2017, it had one of the world's highest levels of GDP relative to population. The two key takeaways we can learn from this is that business may not always recognize where its best interests lie. In the private sector, if the private sector is to play a central role in rebuilding institutions, it will need strong employee organizations.
In 1864, Denmark was defeated in a war with Prussia, losing a huge portion of its territory and national confidence. The country was left poor, divided, and uncertain of its future. But instead of waiting for the government to rebuild the nation, business leaders stepped up. One of them, a railroad entrepreneur named Niels Anderson, decided that Denmark's future depended on cooperation, not conflict. In 1896, he founded the Confederation of Danish Employers with the goal of creating industrial peace, but not by crushing labor, but by working with it. This cooperative spirit evolved into what's now called the Danish model. Under this model, businesses, labor unions, and the government share responsibility for shaping economic policy. Employers accepted strong unions as legitimate partners, while workers agreed to negotiate fairly rather than strike endlessly. Henderson points out that this balance between fairness and competitiveness helped Denmark become one of the most innovative, prosperous, and equal countries in the world. So what connects Denmark's story to the modern climate challenge? Both examples show that reform can come within the capitalism itself. Both sections show how businesses can go beyond profit, using their power to strengthen society and tackle climate change. Henderson writes that if capitalism is going to survive, it must evolve into a system that protects not just wealth, but the institutions that make freedom and prosperity possible.
Mauritius is an unlikely success story that the author uses as an example. Mauritius is located off the coast of Madagascar in the Indian Ocean. What makes Mauritius fascinating is that they are a tiny island that provides and lives off sugar. Before 1968, Mauritius was a British colony heavily dependent on sugar exports. It was deeply divided by ethnic and class tensions, and many experts predicted political conflict and economic collapse. In 1968, they gained independence from the British Empire, and they chose cooperation with the Prime Minister of Sivu Sagur Ramgoolam, which made a historic deal with the sugar elites, protecting their property in exchange for their investment in national development. In 1970 and 1980, Mauritius created export processing zones to attract foreign investments and expand into textiles and manufacturing. This shift brought jobs, especially for women, and helped reduce poverty in the country. 1990s to the 2000s, the country diversified into tourism, financial services, and education while maintaining democracy and social programs. Today, Mauritius is known for strong institutions, inclusive growth, and low corruption. It has one of the highest human development index scores in Africa and is often called the African tiger. So what can we learn or take away from Mauritius? The fact that they are a non-European and racial heterogeneous example of a country that is succeeding and thriving today. Their business also shows to align with national and societal goals, and their business can expand beyond its shareholders, and also that real incentives matter, which means that instead of just caring about something, they actually do something about it.
As we've wrapped up our presentation, there are a few things we'd like you to reflect on to get a further in-depth analysis of what it's like with these added information. First, what are your views on free markets and government regulation balance? Does this information change anything for you? Second, why was business and government collaboration in Mauritius successful when similar efforts have failed elsewhere? And last, should businesses be held responsible for global problems like climate change? Think on these and perhaps change your thoughts and opinions. Perspectives on free markets have shifted significantly over time, from the classical liberalism of Adam Smith to the conservative likes of Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman, as well as in the eyes of the people. Chapter 7 of Reimagining Capitalism in a World on Fire by Rebecca Henderson asserts that the success of free markets in economic growth and social well-being comes from its ties with government participation. Thank you.